So,
what's trending?
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to Trending. It is great to be with you. Coming up, joining me in just a little bit will be the royal and celebrity matchmaker, Christina Pineda. She and her sister, who co-founded Matchmakers in the City, have been everywhere from Access Hollywood to many other great shows in Hollywood and LA. Well, great shows, high-profile shows. And she's joining us here today in just a little bit. She's a faithful Catholic, and we'll dive into your questions surrounding dating and relationships. If you have a question, the number is 1-888-914-9149. You can also reach out on social media, especially my Instagram story. Just find me at Timmerie, Timmerie, and ask your question today. We will give it to Christina, our in-house matchmaker. We're also going to be discussing a challenge for especially men, but all of us. That is dating bad habits and how to fix them. In fact, some pretty high-level celebrities have recently shared about their bad habits. In fact, their bad habits have made it to the top of Billboard charts rather quickly as they sing about them. Maybe these have been similar ones for you. I'm also going to dive into a very important topic, and that is gay rights don't need to come at the cost of trafficking women's bodies. The little unknown fact is the reality that so-called gay rights have been on the backs of women. How? I'll share with you a little bit, and we'll also answer the question, is surrogacy okay for Catholics? You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I want to dive into a very important topic. Monica Klein was a sex educator for Planned Parenthood. And she was trained to do one very, in the eyes of Planned Parenthood, important thing. And that was encourage a sexually active lifestyle for youth so that ultimately, as she said in her own words, these programs are about sexualizing children and leading them to abortion. In fact, she was taught specifically of the type of attitude she was supposed to have with regard to treating children as young as 10 years old. Her mentor at a Planned Parenthood in Texas told her she needed to see them and realize that they are sexually active, and if they haven't, they will be. And so it's our job as sex educators to teach them about all forms of sexuality to ensure that they're reducing their so-called risks. This is the challenge. Why? Because Planned Parenthood is being invited into the vast majority of public schools. Now, I've actually had the opportunity to work with public schools in sex education programs. In fact, I worked in a abstinence-only school district. That means that that specific school district could only promote and push forward a sex education program that was abstinence-friendly. So they had a hard time getting Planned Parenthood into their schools. This is why laws such as this are very important, and parents speak up to make sure that you're in an abstinence-only school district. But here's what was fascinating. I was asked to come in and speak. And I was being vetted by one of the school educators, and they were talking to me, and all of a sudden, they're saying, all of this sounds great. And they said, I have one question for you. They said, we do have some transgender students. And she said, what kind of education will you provide for them? And of course, working in a secular environment in this instance, I'm on my toes, and I say, well, I'm a little confused by the question. Because whether someone's heterosexual, bisexual, same-sex attracted, or transgender, you are in an abstinence-only school district. So I will stick to the message and not single out or isolate or make any student feel like they're being targeted in the conversation when, as you know, I'm sure as an educator, kids who struggle with gender dysphoria themselves already feel isolated. School district couldn't really respond much and say, oh, yes, of course, yeah, you wouldn't. And she's like backtracking very quickly. And I said, but I will be very frank and clear in giving the status of sexuality in our culture and the higher risk when same-sex interaction occurs, a higher risk towards sexually transmitted diseases, but also physical damage because certain body parts aren't supposed to work together in certain ways. I'm sorry, but we have to be blunt. And so this was what allowed, in this instance, me to work with the school system because they had an abstinence-only program. I bring this up because when we have abstinence-only programs in public schools, if that's the route you're taking for your children, it actually changes the game in terms of what types of sex ed programs can be allowed. Now, various states are mandating so-called comprehensive sex education programs, which do sexualize your children, as Monica Klein's been made clear, because if it's not me or a pro-life, abstinence-only educator, people like Pam Stenzel and others coming in, then it could be, and often is, Planned Parenthood, a radically pro-abortion organization that does want your kids to be sexually active, and they're not telling them about any ounce of abstinence. They want them to be sexualized. That's their goal. In fact, Monica Klein, a former Planned Parenthood trained instructor, said these programs are actually created to teach your children about sexuality in order for them to be sexually active. She said comprehensive sexuality education is all about grooming children. She said it's wielded as a marketing tool to lead to abortion. I grew up in the pro-life movement. I've been working in abortion and chastity education, the pro-life movement, since I was a teenager. I saw for years among my peer group, and now today among high schoolers, and in fact, even younger now, middle schoolers and up, where teens are receiving text messages from Planned Parenthood, Snapchats, Instagram notes. In fact, in the state of California, they were mandating a law that would put Planned Parenthood's number and contact information on the school IDs of every public school student. And not to mention the rampant social media recruitment, should I say, to a certain mindset and ideology. Now, Monica Klein emphasized something very important. If you're a parent, you know a parent, or if you're an educator, you should be aware of this. The goal of all sexual education programs, these comprehensive sex ed programs, and Planned Parenthood's work is to isolate the child from their parents. This is the same thing that the transgender LGBTQ movement is doing with a rampant, and let me make this clear, recruiting that they are participating in through social media. Do you or someone you know find your child out of left field suddenly identifying as bi, transgender, or same-sex attracted? Believe me when I tell you, I have parents writing to me, probably an average of 1 to 3 a week, sharing about their children who have been recruited through rampant social media campaigns, and that includes one-on-one messages from people to pull them into that LGBTQ lifestyle. But very importantly, to isolate them from their parents. It's very important to recognize that Monica Klein, who worked for Planned Parenthood, emphasized that not only does Planned Parenthood find abstinence laughable, but they, quote, see parents as a barrier to service. That is Planned Parent's service, and their most expensive service being abortion. Why is this problematic? Because comprehensive sex education programs, the vast majority, they're in many, many schools today. Look at the human body as a tool to be used and abused both by oneself in masturbation engagement, because that's something that they're teaching kids, but also through sexualizing them at a far younger age than they should. They're putting kids at risk for substance abuse, because when you sexualize a child at a younger age, they tend to end up engaging in substance abuse. Because it's a life of anxiety and fear. Because it mandates that you subscribe to birth control and abortion. Also, 2 things that are leading to depression, anxiety, suicidality, and much more. Not to mention all the health risks, from increase in the risk of cancer, blood clotting, hemorrhaging, so many other things. So what do we need to do about this? Well, number one, I'm here to give you resources and information here on Trending, and this is why I'm here to share with you, yes, the scary and sorrowful news at times, but the hard truth that we have to make choices. And sometimes it's not just the choice to opt out of sending your kid to the sex ed program, because in some states and some school districts, you can't even opt out now. The government has taken over your rights as a parent. But here's the problem. Those other kids that your kids are going to school with are still receiving the same content, and they're influencing each other even worse as peers. So it's a challenge to reconsider the school system that you're in. That's the responsibility as parents, and that's the Catholic approach. You as a parent are responsible for the procreation and education of your children, even when it hurts, even when it's challenging, even when it's difficult. I'm hearing in droves from parents who are choosing now to homeschool their children when they thought they never would or never could, yet have done it and they've made it work. So please continue to share the good information that people need to hear so that they can make the necessary changes. We can't close our eyes or ears to what's happening. Also, there are great programs such as one that I'm working with next week in Southern California, Los Angeles, such as Vox Vitae, where they're doing the exact opposite of Planned Parenthood. It's a Catholic pro-life leadership training program for youth. Why? Because they need to be equipped with the truth, their Catholic faith, what's going to help them survive in this culture and not sexualize them, but see the great value they have and know how to respond as their peers are telling them a lie, and so is social media in the world today. And so as news comes out of places even such as Chicago, where news came out this week, and this is on Fox News, Chicago has stated that starting this fall, they're going to start offering free condoms in the public schools to students as young as in 5th grade. 5th grade. How old is a 5th grader? I need to look that up right now. How old is a 5th grader? Let's see. 10 years old. 10, 11 years old. Yeah, really? That 10-year mark. You have to be age 10 by the 31st of August. So 10-year-olds in the state of Illinois, in Chicago, in public school systems, starting this fall, warning to you parents, are going to be able to have access to condoms. Why do I bring this up? Because a parent in Chicago, Diana, wrote to me on Instagram, and she's like, what are your thoughts? You want the honest truth? The Catholic Church teaches that we're responsible for the procreation and education of our children. Get your kid the heck out of that school. What else can we say? No more. You know, there's a point in life where you or your child is being exposed to such radical agendas and ideologies that we should say hell no and move out and move on. Protect your kids, even if it hurts, even if it's challenging. The Lord will bless you. He will open doors and help you to find the right door to go through to help protect your child, raise your child in the faith and holiness and chastely. Pray for your kids. Pray over them. Talk about these tough issues because they are being exposed to them through their peers. And don't accept Chicago's public school system mandating condoms for 10 years old and up. You need to fight as parents and object loudly. But no, if they're about to mandate condoms in your schools, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's already going on in the school culture now. Again, great programs like Vox Vitae. You can find Vox Vitae online if you're in the LA area. I'll be with you, and I'll be there to teach your kids. VoxVitae.org, and there are other great programs available, such as Vox Vitae. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Let's talk about the good stuff of finding love, dating, relationships, because the reality is, with the over-sexualization of our culture, it's led to difficult relationships. Anyone from an 18-year-old to a 25-year-old to a 40-year-old is struggling on how to date. And so joining me now is celebrity and royal matchmaker Christina Pineda. She's the founder and one of the matchmakers for her company, Matchmakers in the City. Christina, we are looking at some great songs in the respect that they've shown bad habits that high-profile Billboard chart artists are sharing when it comes to dating. What can you tell us about these trends and how they can be learned from in terms of your clients matching up with exactly what we're hearing in these songs?
Yes. Hi, Timmerie. So good to be with you. There are two major top charting songs called Bad Habits right now. That one was released by Usher in September 2020, and then Ed Sheeran just released one on June 25th of this year. And they're really good, as you mentioned, because they're honest. And I think a lot of times pop artists get into this place where they get fame and then they can't relate anymore to people and their songs just go down the drain. But these are two artists who have been around for a long time, and they come clean in these songs. And men need to listen up, because this is not something that the culture is teaching you. A lot of times men will think that they have all the time in the world to meet their future wife, the woman of their dreams. And they are told to sow their oats while they're young, have fun, play around. You won't be able to do this in the future, so get it all out now. Which is probably the worst possible advice that anyone could give you, but that's what the culture has been telling them for years. And that's why you see in a lot of colleges, plus men going out of control and people not getting married in college anymore, and then having a really hard time finding the right person when they get into the professional world. So I work with singles all the time, so I see it actually happening. But Usher's song was the first one who kind of got me into these songs. And one of the lines that he says is, "I had one too many one nights. I keep messing up my love life." And it's really catchy. And I have it on my Instagram too. And I just can't stop singing this song. But it's the truth that he's had so many one night stands and he's fallen for the low hanging fruit. And as a celebrity, he gets women coming on to him all the time. It's really hard to say no to that. And most guys are in a similar position. Maybe you're not being DM'd all the time with this, but if you're relatively good looking, women are, it's hard for men. So I want men to know that I'm not blaming you for this, but you do really need to have a lot of self-discipline when you're out there, because don't listen to what the culture is telling you. It will lead you down a very dark path.
That's Christina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City here on Relevant Radio. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. From the flip side, from the perspective of women, we've been told for years, know that that's just kind of how guys come. They're going to sow their wild oats when they're a little younger. You might even meet them when they're a little rough around their edges, but just embrace that he'll move past that. He'll grow up. I remember my attitude was always kind of thinking, no. Now, at the same time, Christina, we do have to recognize people do make mistakes. We have to be willing to forgive and acknowledge change and transformation that occurs in people's lives. But if they're not living virtuously and we're expected to just accept that they're continuing to live in those bad habits and maybe haven't gone through some healing, self-forgiveness, and, I don't know, as Catholics, really turn to our Lord in reconciliation and worked through those challenges so that they're not regular habits. I think that's important, because I've said this many times before, and I'm sure you talk to your clients about this. If you're not chaste before marriage, you're not going to be chaste after marriage. It becomes a difficulty within marriage if you weren't chaste before, where unchastity peeks its head in various ways, maybe not right away, but as a coping mechanism because of the bad habit you had before.
That's so true. And it's also so unfortunate that being a virgin for women is looked down upon, but for men, it is a stigma. And I feel really bad for men, because it's a beautiful thing, but there's movies like The 40-Year-Old Virgin, all these cultural symbols that are showing you that is terrible. You should never do that. And then it's leading men to believe that there's something wrong with them if they value their purity, which is the opposite of the truth.
It's so true. It's funny. I remember Pam Stenzel, who is an abstinence speaker, travels all over the nation. She speaks to, somewhere around 1 million youth each year. And she told the story to me one day about how she went to public school, gave this chastity talk, and afterwards she was walking down the hall at the school, and this huge, 6-foot-something football player comes running down the hall, and he throws his arms in the air. This is kind of a cool cat there at the school, and he's going, "Virgin!" Why was he doing that? Because she just told them all about sexually transmitted diseases and how good guys don't fall for the lasting impact it has on men and women, both interpersonally and health-wise, that a sexually active lifestyle offers in high school and even later.
That's a great point. And I think we also need to have everyone be aware that addictions stay with you. Even if you get clean and even if you have major conversions. I once worked with a bachelor who actually married the woman of his dreams, but he had a pretty wild life before her. And it was very difficult because he was still struggling with substance abuse when they were dating. And she just stuck with him because she thought that it would end. And she was abiding by that cultural norm, Timmerie, that you heard about how, oh, it's just, that's normal. Guys are a little wild. They'll straighten out once you get married. And the marriage was very, very difficult. And she ended up needing to separate from him because it got that hard. And she realized that she couldn't win the battle over his addictions. And the addictions can be for drinking, it can be alcohol, it can be sex addictions, it can be pornography. There's some pornography, right? There's a whole slew of, that's why when you start going down that path, it just gets darker and darker and darker. And it could be children out of wedlock, and you might not even make it out alive when you go through that. But this man did, and he married the woman of his dreams, but even that was tainted because of his past.
Yes, and it's true. So let's talk about what people can do to change the situation so they don't find themselves in a marriage where, you weren't chased before. You're doing whatever, sowing your wild oats, and then you meet someone, you start to settle down, but you create this bad habit and marriage falls apart. Or maybe you just feel like you can't find anyone. How can we change this? Remedy the bad habits, sub them out for good habits, and work on getting dates again.
Yes, and the first thing I advise is self-discipline. This is a trait that our current culture hates, and it's difficult, but anyone who's ever done a sport, is an athlete, it has any profession that you're good at, you know that it takes self-discipline to get there. You have to employ that same self-discipline to your love life, and knowing that if I want to get to the woman who is the woman of my dreams, the woman who's at the top of the tree, who I'm going to reach for, then I need to work on myself now and make myself ready for her now. So that means staying away from temptations from women who aren't right for you, and not thinking, oh, she's going to give me free sex, I'll just hang out with her. No, just stay away, say no to that, and focus on preparing yourself for that right woman. And the way you can do that, also, you can start reading some relationship books and just really diving deeply into who you are with the Lord.
That's Christina Pineda, celebrity and royal matchmaker. We'll come back with more tips for how you can remedy bad habits in dating and get more dates and ultimately a long-lasting relationship and marriage. Don't go away. Have a question? We'll take it. 1-888-914-9149.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back here on Trending. My guest is Christina Pineda. She is a matchmaker from Matchmakers in the City. She works with celebrity royals and us lowly peasants. Christina, let's talk about remedying some of the bad habits in dating. You mentioned how important it is to start creating good habits and limiting yourself from the types of environments that many men just kind of fall into. What else do men need to do ultimately to develop this good habit and virtue that's like a muscle, essentially?
Yeah, I think, like you were saying about avoiding certain places where the temptations are going to arise, whether if you're in college, avoiding late nights at fraternities, if you know that's normally where you fall into this bad habit, or deleting your Instagram if you're a man and you see that it's bringing you and it's not for business. It's just a lot of these things men really need to guard their eyes because men are such visual creatures. Women are too, but it's another level for men. And really just focusing on going to places that bring people into your life who you could see yourself wanting to become, because you become who your friends are. And then when you're hanging around those kinds of people, then you might meet the right woman for you, and you want to spend your time with women who you could see raising your future children. So always think about that when you're choosing a woman to date. You think about, and a lot of men do this subconsciously, but could you see her raising your future son or daughter? And that is a good sign. If you can pinpoint that virtue in someone else, in a man, to model that for yourself, and then for a woman, so you could see partnering with her and growing together and building a family together.
That's ultimately keeping the big picture of dating in mind, emphasizing and recognizing that dating is ultimately oriented toward marriage and children. And so having the perspective of, would this person be a good mother? Would this person be a good father, is a really important perspective to take. And it also challenges people in terms of their intimacy as well, to have the proper context of who this person will be for someone else as well. I know we have questions coming in. If you have a question during the show, the number's 1-888-914-9149. Give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. Christina, we have a question coming in on Instagram. The question is, if you are dating someone and he asks for a break, what does that mean?
Ooh, it could mean a lot of things. And you really have to ask him what it means. I would just straight up ask him, okay, what does this mean? What are the boundaries? What is going on in his life? It could be something that he might have lost a job, or we talked about this on our last podcast, actually. And we have a segment called Sisterly Advice, and my mom was visiting and she gave some motherly advice. She was our guest. And she said that if men are very tied to their careers, so if something happened at the workplace that really upset him, that might be the problem. But you need to figure it out. Is it because he's unsure about you? Maybe you're doing something that bothers him and he doesn't, maybe you have a drinking problem, or there's something that he couldn't see in you that doesn't want to see in the wife of his future, the mother of his future children. So I really would get to the bottom of it and ask him directly. And then if you're still okay with going on the break, establishing those ground rules for, what does this mean? How long is it going to be? Are we able to date other people? Do you just need a week because you have a stressful week at work? Or is this more you want to spend some time dating another woman who you met, who you're attracted to? That could also be a reason, but we don't know. You have to examine and talk to him about it.
Okay, Christina, just one thought, because I want to talk about this a little bit more. A lot of the times people, especially women, will say, okay, we're on a break now, and it could be either side having chosen the break, but every time it seems to be that they don't actually want a break. They just don't know how to end the relationship, and so it's the easier thing to do. So how, getting to the bottom of it, I think, is important, but how do you overcome that habit of not just ending a relationship when that's what you actually want?
I know, Timmerie, it's so hard, because I have a saying that once you break, it's broken. And unfortunately, everyone who I've date coached who's gone on a break, it's always ended in a breakup. But they were either too polite to do it, or they still were unsure. If you need that clean of a cut away from that person, that's a really big red flag, saying, boom, this probably isn't the right person for you. And just before you do anything, make sure there's actually a great Ignatian Spiritual Exercises website where it goes through the process of how to make a decision. And it's fantastic. A lot of our members use that. But go through all of those steps to determine, before you even say anything, to determine it. And then you can make a very informed decision. And it's going to be painful, unfortunately, especially the first 48 hours. That's a detox period. And then you might be devastated in that period. But then after that time, it's people who face addiction, other addictions have the same thing. And after that time, it gets easier. So you're going to have to go through those labor pains in the beginning, but then when the new life forms, it will be a lot easier.
You're listening to Relevant Radio. Joining me now is Christina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. Give us a call if you have your question or ask on social media. The number's 1-888-914-9149. You can ask your question again on my Instagram story or anywhere else, but we have a question on Twitter from Stephanie. Stephanie's asking, where in the world do people find nice Catholic men who are waiting until marriage and who actually basically take their Catholic faith really seriously? She said it seems as if they don't exist or are already taken or moved away from here. She's in LA to somewhere else and are already married.
Well, first I'm just going to say Matchmakers in the City. We have some amazing, faithful Catholic men who we work with. And then I would say to go to the young adult groups, every possible young Catholic adult group that you can find. Go to their events, join whatever online groups they're part, just be part of everything. But also sometimes people, especially women, you might go and get disappointed if you don't meet your future husband at said event. And that's just generally a recipe for disaster. You do want to focus on the Lord should be your primary focus, and developing your romance and your relationship with the Lord first. The man will come, but you do have to open yourself to going to one non-work related event per week and meeting new people, because he's not just going to knock on your door as you're watching Netflix. So definitely get out there, but also don't expect him to be there. And also make sure you're getting ready for these events. Don't just go straight from work. Primp. Men, especially in LA, you're in LA, I have meetings with people and they say, I just went to LA. Everyone's so beautiful there. It's true. That's what the men are used to seeing. So women have to take it up another level when you're here. You just have to do it up. You have to do your makeup, you have to do your hair, wear something great, conservative that you look good in, but that shows that you are caring about your appearance, because men really care about that.
These are all very important tips. You know, Christina, I have a question for you, and it's from a conversation I had this week at dinner with a single man in his mid-30s, and we were discussing how he really believes that you should just take me as I am, take it or leave it. Don't have to change my hair, don't have to change my clothing, yet he really wants to meet someone. And so I want to hear your thoughts on finding the balance between expecting someone to take you as you are and actually trying to spruce yourself up to get a date, maintain a relationship, and get married.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a hard one, because our goal is to continually work towards being the best versions of ourselves. And sometimes we get in our own way because we think that we are, and he might not be thinking this, but we think that we are perfect and we shouldn't have to change anything. But I know I'm a perfectionist. I get it. When I get criticized, I don't like it. But is it going to make me better at what I do? Probably. And it's painful, and I can't stand it, and I will cry and scream and be upset. Maybe not literally, but in my head. So you might not really want to do anything differently, but if you just spend some time gently listening, reading about relationships, seeing what are things that maybe, or even working with a date coach to see little things that you can tweak here and there, that's the best way to do it. And that's coming from an attitude of humility, because sometimes that perfectionism can be a prideful way, and we never want to be. Pride is the mother of all sins. So we don't ever want to be prideful. We always have new things to learn. And adopting that humble attitude will get you closer to love and will bring you to your future wife.
Okay, so say you're someone who doesn't want to make changes. You're saying, take me or leave me as I am. As a friend, as a family member who knows, look, this person isn't getting any younger. They're not ending up in committed relationships. Perhaps there's one thing about their appearance that I really want to give feedback. How can you give that feedback constructively, and maybe even give an encouraging challenge, such as, try it for 3 months or 6 months? What do you do with your clients in these instances?
Well, it's different for us because they're paying us to tell them advice. It's very difficult as a friend or relative to give any kind of dating advice.
Thanks
What
for
I would
telling me give up,
recommend.
Timmerie.
Oh, Timmerie, you care so much.
Okay, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you. I just had to take the advice and move on.
That's okay. It's one of those things where if you want to recommend something, say this is coming from a place of love and I want to see you with the right person, and just recommend some soft things that they could do, or even working with a date coach, getting their photos done, doing something that, because if you are specifically talking about their hairstyle, it might be too much for them to hear. But if a date coach says that, it's another thing because they're not related. That's why I've given up telling anyone advice unless they're paying us, because even if I mean it from the goodness of my heart, they will not take it well. And people will ask for advice when they want it. And if they're not, it may take them years and years and years to find the right person, but that's their choice. They know that they can seek advice and they know that they can get help. If they're asking you for advice though, go ahead and just say, but couch it with, I think you're a wonderful person. These are some little things that may help you. And I would even start with, I don't feel comfortable. I might not be the best person to tell you this. Maybe listen to some of Christina's talks with me, or on Timmerie's show if you're not Timmerie, or work with our dating coaches.
That's Christina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. You can find her and her work at matchmakersinthecity.com. We've also tagged her on social media. And I will be back, and I'm going to discuss the important topic surrounding gay rights and how they're really being used to harm women, and you'll hear why. But before we do that, we actually had Mary from Riverside is calling right now, and she has a comment about the dating scene for young men today. Mary, welcome to Trending. What's your comment?
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
We've been taking your questions surrounding dating tips and relationships. And I apologize, Mary. We do want to hear from you. Mary from Riverside, California is calling to share about how young men do desire to chase relationships today. Mary, welcome to Trending.
Hi. I just wanted to share this story because I have a nephew, and he and his wife, were forced to have chaperones during their entire courtship because her father was very do that. I was talking to
Mary, I think we're losing you. If you want to give us a call back, we'd love to take your call. Otherwise, Stella from Los Angeles is calling. Stella, welcome to Trending. What's your question?
Hi. My question has to do with asking permission from my parents to get married with my boyfriend. I think I should mention that they're not the biggest fans of him. He comes from a Pentecostal family. They really want me to marry in a Catholic church. We still go to the same church that my parents got married in. And since they're not the biggest fans of him, I was wondering how to break the news to them, whether we should do it together or I give them a heads up first and then bring him for like a coffee time, or I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. So is the question, Stella, of whether or not you should tell your parents you're getting married or ask permission?
I for sure want, I guess
ask their blessing, should I say.
Yeah, I always thought it's the right thing to ask them for their blessing. But also my friends around me say that's very old school, and they think that's kind of funny that I want to do it that way. But I always thought it's the right thing to ask for their blessing.
Yes, absolutely. That is a beautiful thing, Stella, to ask your parents for their blessing in getting married. And I think it's important that if this man wants to marry you, that he asks your parents. I think that might go a long ways in respecting your parents. Now, that said, they can say no, and not give their blessing. And that's up to you as a couple to determine, and also to know some challenges you may face with parents and family. And that's something for you to discern. But from a Catholic perspective, and I'm sure your parents would want and hope that you know this, to get married in the Catholic Church, which I believe is something that you want, Stella, your soon-to-be spouse, potentially, or fiancé, would have to agree to raise the children in the Catholic faith. And so it's important that he knows that before getting married, that faith is important, and in order to marry in the Catholic Church as a non-Catholic, you'd have to agree to raise our children Catholic. And so having that conversation with your boyfriend might go a long ways in helping him to be prepared for what your parents are hopeful for. And he might even be able to go to your parents saying, listen, I do intend to marry your daughter in the church, and I do intend to raise the children Catholic. That might help in some of the challenging circumstances surrounding your possible engagement. Stella, great question. Thanks for asking. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Mary from Riverside had called, and the call broke up, but she wanted to share just how there are guys out there who do want to be chaste. She shared how her nephew and his wife, who are now married, were under very strict rules from their parents about having chaperones during their dates to try to uphold chastity in the relationship, and how at the end of the day, it's been a great gift, and how people do want to be chaste, but sometimes, and I'll add this, the challenge is that people aren't given the guidelines or the parameters to make that happen. The world, social media says, just fall into bed. They don't help you with practical tips to walk you along the way to actually have a chaste relationship. Unfortunately, you just can't trust kids today in the respect to that. They don't know how to do anything else. Social media, television, music, all brainwash them truly into another mindset. And so why would they do anything other than what they're regularly, and should I say regularly, consuming in terms of content? You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I want to talk about a very, very important topic here on the show. We're going to discuss in just a moment how gay rights, the demand for gay rights, is actually costing women their lives, their livelihood, and their health. Why? Well, I'll share you a little bit about what's happening worldwide when it comes to this specific issue. First, Relevant Radio has a free gift for you, our new book, Treasures of the Rosary, Reflections by Those Who Pray It Daily. The book contains rosary meditations of St. Jose Maria and reflections by St. John Paul II and our very own Father Rocky. Beautiful imagery can be found throughout the book. No shipping or handling cost for the book. It's absolutely free. The book is only available for a limited time. So sign up for your free copy today at relevantradio.com/treasures. And join Father Rocky for the happiest half hour of your day, the Family Rosary Across America, coming up in just a little bit at 7 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio. Again, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I want to dive into the topic of how we're seeing gay rights are truly putting women in harmful situations. There were protests that occurred all over, specifically Jerusalem, talking about how, and sparked by the fact that people who are in same-sex relationships want the right to engage the services of a surrogate. Now, if you don't know what a surrogate is, who a surrogate is, or what surrogacy is, I'll share with you briefly. In vitro fertilization is an artificial means of conceiving a child. That's where a donor gives sperm and a donor gives egg to create new human life in a petri dish. Now, often it might be a parent who's going through IVF who then chooses to have that sperm and egg, may or may not be their sperm and egg, implant in the uterus of the people who want to have the baby. But there's also another thing, such as essentially what it is wombs for rent. That's what surrogacy is, and it's not right. But for some reason, we've made that legal, or there are no legal sanctions on it in many countries. So what surrogacy is where a life has been created artificially and a woman is being hired to gestate just to carry a baby. Now what's happened is there's been an amendment to the surrogacy laws there in Jerusalem, and people are protesting and really disagreeing with this, specifically people who want access to a child, but get this, they're not a man and a woman. You see, surrogacy and vitro fertilization allow through scientific manipulation for the contribution of those couples to be given to the child that is created. But the problem is that in this process, it's denying often the children a right to their biological mother and father, also denying a child a right to the carrier, the surrogate, who carried and bonded with them for 9 months, and much more. And so what's happening is there have been explosive protests, and people are objecting because they're saying this is a violation of gay rights. But let me share with you just a little bit for a moment here. Bear with me to understand just a little glimpse of the impact of surrogacy. And if you're just joining us, this is very important because people do not realize what's happening with surrogacy. You see, surrogacy is a human rights violation. First, let's talk about how it exploits women. It exploits women, and I'll just give you 2 examples of hundreds that I could give. It doesn't require informed consent of the surrogate. Why? Because surrogates don't know what they're going to, and they often enter into surrogacy under duress because they find they are in need of some sort of financial compensation. And that's occurring here in the West as well as in third world nations where surrogacy is less expensive and there's less culpability for the people who are hiring out these women for their wombs. And so most women are not free when they choose to become surrogates. And there is a difference between altruistic surrogacy and surrogacy that's really essentially just a legal contract, a commercial surrogacy we could refer to it as. And much can be said as to the problems of altruistic surrogacy as well, but we're not going to dive into that fully today. We're going to more so focus on why surrogacy is a human rights issue and some of the impact it has on the woman as well. But why is surrogacy a human rights violation from the perspective of the baby? Well, it essentially abandons children in the respect that the law, nations, governments, and legal contracts to create surrogates are abandoning children by the buying and selling of children, by contractually entering into an agreement to be removed, that is, the biological parents and donors, from being parents and present at all to a child prior to the child even being conceived. It's a you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back contract, a give and take, to produce a child for someone, and that child doesn't go to the surrogate, that child doesn't go to the biological parents. It's denying children their parents. You see, this is interesting because in United Nations law, international law, it's very important to recognize that the UN itself, in document Article 7 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, recognizes 2 very important things. Rights for children. Number 1, the child has a right to know his or her parents. And number 2, that a child has a right to be cared for by his or her parents. You see, surrogacy laws, or the lack of restriction in unregulated surrogacy today, which surrogacy should be completely abolished and abandoned, are denying children the right to know their parents and are denying the children the right to be cared for by their parents. For some reason, international and UN attorneys are getting around this, though. They're getting around this because they're saying, well, they can at least have, for example, access to information about their parents if they so choose. This is despicable. Access to information if they somehow find out that they were born through surrogacy and IVF and then go and contact a clinic is no right or replacement for a child who has a right to know their parents or be cared for by their parents. And so surrogacy is bad for women and bad for children because it violates our basic human rights. Surrogacy also hurts women. Did you know that women who are surrogates, but also women who go through in vitro fertilization, have high-risk pregnancies, very high-risk pregnancies, in fact, have a very high miscarriage rate? So-called selective reduction regularly occurs. Now, selective reduction is abortion because multiple babies are implanted in a woman's uterus as the norm, usually, when in vitro fertilization or IVF or surrogacy occurs. Now, in IVF, it's usually the woman who herself wants the child, and then she selectively chooses which children to kill through abortion, or so-called selective reduction. But in the case of surrogacy, it's a person who contracted this surrogate and who that person chooses to end the life of babies inside another person's body. In fact, there have been countless court cases throughout the nation battling exactly over this. And the reality is that a woman, a surrogate, has no right or say over these children. Women who are surrogates also have a much higher rate of postpartum depression. They also have chronic post-pregnancy symptoms that are ongoing. And they have the loss of motherhood, that although they may have entered into a contract and agreed to, has a lasting, long-term, and harmful impact on them. We need to emphasize that wombs are not for rent, and this takes advantage of the vulnerable because it's usually the rich preying on the backs of the poor and women in order to have a surrogate, have a child. You see, gay rights activists have no right to demand that surrogacy include them having access to these women's bodies. Not only that, it's very, very important that we recognize that surrogacy is taking advantage of women, and this is why the Catholic Church has explicitly spoken against it, because it involves usually abortion. It's a harmful creation of new human life. And the reality is that it doesn't solve problems of infertility. It doesn't protect a child, and it doesn't protect the health of a woman and also her long-term fertility after going through IVF or being a surrogate. We're here as always on Trending to answer your challenging questions. We'd love to hear from you and give you a faith-filled perspective. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending to subscribe and share this episode.